1952, Magnitogorsk. The great construction site of the Stalin era is in full swing day and night. Hundreds of people are arriving from all over the Soviet Union to build a giant city among the Ural hills and brown steppes. The roar of excavators and the shouts of foremen merge into the background in which a new country is being born. But no one yet knows that right under their feet a city has long existed. Invisible, incomparably ancient, and the first person to hear its breath was not a human at all. On the day when the fourth blast furnace was laid, a shift of miners under the leadership of the young engineer Pavel Voronov drilled a shaft to lay the power foundation. The project was strict. An ideal depth was required, no red tape or slack. Working in tight, damp rock, they waited only for the signal to change and a piece of bread to go out into the light and forget about the soot and layers of magnetite over their heads for at least an hour. In the middle of the shift, something went wrong. Suddenly, the iron drill biting into the seam fell into the void with unexpected ease. A dull, unnatural blow for stone was heard. The five workers looked at each other with apprehension. This only happens over voids, and voids in these places should only exist in children's fears, but not in reality. Pavel came closer, illuminating the hole with a kerosene lamp. The light barely caught the wall, perfectly smooth as if polished by a huge palm. No rash, no chips, no rock. The edge was so smooth that the lamp could have been placed on its edge. Below, there was a gaping darkness in which something invisible reflected the light. The silence was broken by the voice of driller Idishev. Pavel Ilyich. Do you see this? Pavel squatted down, felt the edge, touched it with his hand. The stone was not just smooth, but also somehow cool soft, as if it were foreign material. From this touch, a shiver ran down the engineer's back. He involuntarily jumped up, wiped his hand on his overalls. His heart was beating as if after a skirmish with his superiors. "This shouldn't happen," he whispered. That night, Pavel wrote a short, rambling note in his personal notebook. The walls aren't stone. Smooth, cold streams in, light reflects strangely. I need to report this to the top. No, I can't. Someone will think it's nonsense. The morning brought alarm. The construction manager himself, a man in an expensive coat and with a whip in his voice, came to inspect the anomaly. But even before he arrived, the mine was cordoned off by the military, and a little later Tumkas drove up. People got out of the black cars, dressed neither as engineers nor as soldiers. Their look was such that their boots themselves wanted to come to the surface. One of them, tall, gray-haired, introduced himself as Major Volkov. He did not ask a single question. He simply silently looked into the dark pit, nodded to his colleagues, and wrote something down in a notebook. It felt as if his heart froze somewhere near these walls. The workers who happened to be near the find were immediately sent for an emergency medical examination in an empty trailer of the medical unit. Voronov was not touched. He was called to an evening meeting. The meeting was short. Major Volkov held himself straight, as if absorbed into his shoulder straps. There were no threats in his voice, only a command. This area is immediately transferred to a special regime. Everything seen below 300 meters is a state secret. Conversations outside the facility are treason. You are assigned to the facility and work until further notice. Pavel was stubborn. He was more afraid of stupid orders than death. After the meeting, he tried to talk to the senior foreman to find out what the men thought. But the foreman abruptly pushed him away with his hand. "Don't butt in. Think about your wife. Something's wrong here." The following evening, the first unfortunate death occurred at the site. An old miner, a war veteran, seemed to have forgotten where he was and stepped straight into the hole without crying out a word. Those who went down after him found only his jacket on the floor by the wall. But the body itself was gone. Not a drop of blood. Only a dark, barely noticeable imprint remained on the smooth stone, like a drop of mercury. After that, the work stopped. Hundreds of people did not understand what they were risking. Rumors began to spread in the city. They talked about counter-revolutionaries, then about sabotage. Someone whispered about a devil's well that attracted people to it at night with lights. Meanwhile, Volkov closed all the entrances to the mine, and at the entrance they announced that they would build only according to the approved new scheme, and that they would not make any more mistakes. But at night, in the unfinished dormitory, the workers told each other how they heard a distant, uneven humming below, as if someone giant was sorting through chains or leafing through a huge metal book. Nothing had changed on the surface in a week. The roar of escalators, the anger of foremen, the joyful hooray when another standard was met. But underground, something had begun to sprout, unnoticed by most, but terrifying for those who had ever descended to the closed tunnel. Pavel began to notice strange changes. First, a faint, barely perceptible taste of iron in his mouth. Then, a noticeable trembling of the floor, barely audible to anyone but the most desperate miners. Then he began to have dreams, as if his body, light and fragile, was melting on a huge, pulsating surface. Around him, thousands of identical tunnels through which something warm, living, unfamiliar was flowing and shimmering. Soon, these dreams were not confined to him alone. Several workers, all descending into new mines, woke up one night in the same dormitory, sweating, unable to remember their names, screaming with the same horror. They dreamed that their bodies were flowing through smooth metal veins, becoming part of something vast, alien, and eternal. At the end of his shift, Pavel went to the closed entrance. He wanted to make sure that these were just fears and not something serious. He carefully pressed his ear to the metal door and froze. A rhythm was clearly coming from below through the thickness of the earth. Slow, oppressive, without music, but with something fundamental, primordial. For the first time in his life, Pavel heard a heart beating underground. A heart that didn't care at all who was standing above. This rhythm was an invitation and a threat. Pavel quickly moved away, but the echo remained in his spine, in his temples, in the chilling fear. He began to guess. The builders of Magnitka had accidentally awakened not just an ancient void, but the memory of the earth itself. They had found themselves dangerously close to something that did not want to be discovered, something that lived in rhythmic sleep, waiting for people to awaken the ancient beat again. It was impossible to break out of sleep. Even in the darkness, even among friends, when the pipes hummed in the wind, he continued to feel this beating, like an unexpected intrusion of another life. Magnitka lived, but now something ancient and greedy lived in it too. And that night Pavel Voronov believed for the first time, not all secrets can be buried in the ground or a concrete slab. Some wake up on their own when their time comes. In the archived documents of the Ministry of Ferrous Metallurgy for 1952, there are omissions, absurd corrections in pencil, whole pages torn out as if someone was trying to erase a failed experiment from the city's history itself. But there are diaries, protocols, mounds of signatures, non-disclosure agreements, traces clay imprints of human footsteps on the still wet concrete of the industrial age. Officially, Section 9 of mine was temporarily closed for a geological assessment of the subsoil. Unofficially, a double cordon of NKVD and military commandant's office grew around the fresh sinkhole, welded together by the order. No information, contacts, conversations even among themselves. But rumors are not locked behind doors. Half-forgotten legends about voids under the mountains, about black wells breathing or crept among the workers at night. Engineer Pavel Voronov was allowed to stay on the condition that he report daily without emotions, assumptions, and fantasies. He was given a separate room, devoid of windows, with a radio and an illegible portrait of the leader on the wall. During the day, meetings, analysis of the accident with the authorities at night, sleepless walks between damp foundations, where a weak vibrational echo could be felt underfoot. Day 1. A group of prisoners sent to replace the previous miners was sent, strong, taciturn, all with the same eyes, a cloudy, tense gleam, like mercury. The foreman, whose last name was Dyke, was wary of Voronov. Only once, when Pavel asked what it smelled like, did he throw aside. The earth always smells different if you dig deep. Sometimes it doesn't smell like earth at all. The prisoner's tools are new hoses, picks, and drill bits. But after 2 days, 3 of the bits are covered in spots of rusty corrosion, as if from centuries. One breaks, as if made of plasticine, when lightly touched to the tunnel wall. Worker Idyshev, forgotten inside for an hour, comes out and leans with difficulty against a piece of iron reinforcement. Looking at his hand, he whispers that the stone inside is breathing, heating up. It cannot be drilled further. The reports are full of official language. Working area 9.13, 3.5 m of rock have been broken off. There's a smell of ozone and an unknown gas compound. Ventilation is working. Incident. The tool has become unusable. A new one has been issued. But Pavel is writing his second, personal diary. This one is more honest. The smell of metal becomes more intense when someone yells or knocks hard. In silence, it seems to be absent. The drill vibrates strongly. The workers became silent and excited, as if they were listening to someone. Deitch said at night that he saw a shadow run along the wall, but there was no light there at all. On the 3rd day, 2 prisoners were taken away. Both complained of fainting. The orderly reports to the doctor. Blood pressure is normal. Skin is covered with a grayish coating. The smell of rust comes from the mouth. There are stripes on the teeth, as if they chewed iron filings. One driller begins to speak hoarsely in his sleep. The words "deeper," "it's warming," "step inside" are heard. After the interrogation, both fall asleep, never waking up again. Their bodies were carried out at night in or boxes. No one said goodbye. In the evenings, it gets dark early in the yard of the temporary settlement, and the wind from the mountain brings fog, acrid, improbably cool, although it is not yet autumn. Several workers notice flashes of weak light. As if a fluorescent wire is laid deep down, it pulses once every 5 or 6 seconds. Pavel, going out on his rounds, hears under his feet, through the deck of piles, a dull rhythm. Knock, 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 and this regularity is more frightening than any accident. In a whisper in the dining room, the old men say, "The earth is tired here, Pavlusha." They have tormented it for many years. Now it sleeps and dreams of iron. The data from the seismic sensors deepen the paranoia. Every time the blast furnace gas is launched on the surface, the instruments catch a feedback from the depths, but the frequency is strange. It does not correspond to the deep profile. The wave goes, responds as if from a spring. Only metal springs do not sing like that. A week passes. The tunnel corridors change color slightly. Yellowish streaks appear in the wet areas in the light of the lanterns, as if the oxide was not spread out on the surface, but was sitting in the stone itself. The metal that was scraped off the surface bubbles when in contact with air and slowly disappears, like sugar in a teapot. In the middle of the night, Pavel wakes up in a cold sweat after his first real nightmare. He walks through an empty tunnel, remembers home, but the walls of black metal let his shadow pass through them. and each of his steps sinks into the floor, leaving traces that begin to shine and diverge in circles. At the end of the path, he hears a humming laugh, almost musical, and feels that someone huge is leaning towards his ear and whispering, "You're already inside." During the day, an order comes. All seismological and geochemical data are to be sent not to the local technical department, but directly to Moscow, to the secret innovation department. Volkov refuses to explain. His assistant, a Ural German with the face of a metal cutter, mistakenly calls what he found an embryonic cavity complex. When Pavel asks what that means, he sullenly replies, "Ask the geologist why the iron ore is silent." As the week progresses, Pavel's notes become increasingly sparse. The mechanics have begun to misunderstand each other. One has forgotten what his wife looks like. They are no longer afraid of heights, but are terrified of the dark even on the surface. Two have lost their sense of smell. Both say that they can now distinguish rust by taste, although they have not tried it. There is only one joke going around in the closed camp. Soon we will build a city not here, but underground. There are already neighborhoods, streets, and even a heart there. The documents go to the archives of the special department with a note, "Copy for the committee only." On the construction plans, layer after layer, everything that concerns shaft number 9 is carefully painted over in black. In Pavel's personal diary, where the pages have already stuck together from the moisture, there's a line on the back of the receipt. When the city is covered with snow, this beating will still be there underground. It is older than us, more stubborn than our fear. And it seems that it is learning to listen to our thoughts. In the dead of night, black smoke pours from the sky, and the chimneys groan under the sliding of snow crumbs. Behind the wall of the barracks, someone whispers strange words, familiar only to those who have descended into the tunnel. Somewhere beneath them is the tempo of an invisible heart. Knock, 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 an invisible viscous life older than any Vedas and 5-year plans. And the city that is being built on top, without knowing it, is gathering the foundations for yet another hidden civilization. Iron, bitter, and waiting for its hour. In the NKVD reports, which decades later would become a museum curiosity, this phase of construction was simply called Restart of Work on Section Number 9, Adaptation to Abnormal Conditions. But none of those who lived to old age could explain what exactly they were forced to adapt to. What shone near the mines? What darkness did the city itself suck in while the May Day columns marched along the streets above? The first days of the restart passed in oppressive silence. That rare case when even an experienced miner, having descended, involuntarily held his breath, as if the air had become heavier and thicker than it should be. Drops of moisture were attracted to the lanterns, and barely noticeable veins began to appear on the walls of the tunnels. Thin threads of a different color, slightly lighter than the rest of the dead stone. This was not a mineral, not an vein, but something completely different. They did not glow, but emanated a ghostly cold that was felt not by the skin, but under the shoulder blades along the spine. Engineer Voronov writes in his diary, "My God, these canals grow at night. This morning there are more of them. They stretch out behind our wires like roots after moisture. Their geometry seems to change if you look at it long enough." The prisoner said, "This is a Venus pattern, Comrade Chief. The earth is breathing through us now." What did he know such words? The workers were increasingly experiencing memory lapses. One miner from the new team laid down against the wall during a break, and when he came to, he spoke Tatar, although he had never spoken a word of his native language in his entire life. Another, according to rumors, tried to pull out a tooth. He swore that he felt something growing deep in his gums. Pavel notes, the longer a person stays near the new tunnels, the more his perception of space changes. At first, a slight nausea, then a feeling that there are too many or too few steps to the exit. Voronov began to carry a coil of wire with him, unwinding it from the entrance and checking the length back. The device always showed exactly 33 meters, but the pedometer showed 20, 70, sometimes 200. Everything around seemed to be slightly melting from the heat of an invisible fire. At night, he has a dream that will be repeated in the stories of a dozen more people. He is walking along a tunnel. The wall is slightly pulsating, as if something is moving inside it. He grabs the metal and feels a distant jolt under his hand, like blood in an artery, only the blood is not red, but black with a metallic taste. There is wind from above. The concrete ceiling stupidly flows to his feet, and a new passage opens down. He steps there, and there is not darkness, but a dense, viscous, silvery light. He takes another step and feels how each movement becomes simultaneously his and someone else's and a multitude of others, those who have already gone deep into these veins. He wakes up in a cold sweat. His arms ache and the taste of iron on his teeth. He checks. The blood is clean, but his mouth looks like it was painted with pencil lead. He is silent during his shift, looks at the workers. Many are the same, sleepless. Eyes are heavy. Voice is reluctant. The reports upstairs are getting tougher. Geologists arrive from Moscow. Professor Corbett orders a parallel control borehole to be drilled to weigh all the hypotheses of anomalous rock behavior. He was brought in the back of a gazon, stooped, with cracking fingers. Corbett looks at the wall of the tunnel, colored with veins, for a long time, and leaves silently. 2 days later, he writes in his protocol, "This is not a vein or a karst. There are structures here that do not separate stone and metal, but create them with a single movement, like blood in veins. At depth, you can hear a beat like a living thing. The commission on the surface is panicking. Volkov starts shouting when the reports don't match common sense. He demands objective data, scanner measurements, spectra, metallurgist reports. But the laboratory engineer returns pale after taking another sample. It seemed to him that the pit where he lowered the probe answered him with a low, external groan, a rustle similar to a voice from inside a giant pipe. The shift goes crazy at night. One of the prisoners suddenly rips off his shirt and throws himself head first into a smooth wall, breaks his nose, but the wall bends slightly, as if accepting him, and quickly springs back. Before everyone's eyes, a rust stain appears on the smooth surface for a minute, shaped like a human silhouette. After this incident, the mine is temporarily closed without explanation. The entrance is welded with a thin but very strong plate of special steel. Soviet engineers assure that it will withstand both an explosion and the onslaught of air. But after a day, the first signs of rust appear on the inner surface of the plate, and by morning, prints of palms or paws of some creatures that seem to be trying to get out. Voronov increasingly catches himself thinking that the city above, bright and noisy, has become a decoration. Real life is now underfoot. Amidst the raging snowstorms of the season and the prickly Ural dust, when the entire territory of the plant seems like a battlefield between man and nature, it is from below that the warm, almost native air begins to blow, smelling of the crust of black bread and the first rain. This feeling frightens Pavel. Underground there is peace, and even fear finds rhythm and harmony there. He notices that people who have been in the mines begin to unconsciously repeat gestures. They tap on the table in the same tempo, tap their heels in unison, sing, or think they're singing, a simple, rhythmic melody heard in a dream. Sometimes someone breaks down and tries to convey this song to others, but the words are different for everyone, and the tune is always the same, a slow, deep bass in which you can feel anticipation and melancholy. At the beginning of November, a document signed by his senior management arrives. Based on the anomalies detected, completely block the area. All materials and protocols are to be confiscated and destroyed. Personnel are to be transferred to a special status. The information is to be considered as violating the principles of state security. The extraction of memory goes to a new level. Pavel receives an order to be ready at any moment, in case of emergency evacuation. For an engineer, evacuation means only one thing. Either the heart of the earth will really wake up, and then Magnitka will disappear, or the city, just for nothing, will give another layer of its blood in the name of the next 5-year plan, leaving behind a deep trace scar. On the last day before the mine closes, he goes on an excursion for the last time. Everything around him is shaky, half alive. It seems as if in the darkness at the very ground some gigantic, eternal thought is maturing, flowing from one gray piece of rock to another. In the depths of the tunnel, at the very edge of light, he sees how the smoothest wall slowly moves in the rhythm of an invisible beat, like the breath of a sleeping creature. He feels no fear. Suddenly peace comes, not human, not animal, but rather similar to the icy calm of a mountain. He knows what is hidden under Magnitka is neither evil nor good. It is simply the Earth's memory of a time when it was still young and metal flowed through its veins and was not mined and divided, formed into beams and rods. That night before the site closed, Pavel had a dream that would stay with him for the rest of his life. You are part of the rhythm. The heart of the earth is longer than all words. It knows no boundaries. Do not be afraid to be a thing inside me. I'm older than all iron, and you are my first voice above. He wakes up and notices that same metallic rhythm is still trembling in his palms. He will never forget it completely. Magnitogorsk is a city where the heart of the earth once woke up and reached out a little to the light, and fell asleep again, but now it knows. There is life outside, too, singing in time with its beating. The official papers of that period contain dry protocols. Work on section number 9 has been temporarily suspended for technical reasons. Geological exploration is monitoring the anomalous behavior of the rock. But in reality, the city on the surface was becoming more and more restless with each passing day. Rumors were spreading among the workers. Some were talking about a new type of, or others about a cursed cave, and others were starting to drink in silence, unable to find words for the fear that was arising in the authoritative men. The dungeon behind the welded doors lived its own life. Metallic veins, already familiar and therefore even more frightening, grew, cutting through the walls quietly but relentlessly. Engineer Voronov, now practically never leaving his windowless office, was forced to keep double records. The official one for Volkov and the Moscow bosses from the special department, and another coded one where he tried to understand not what was happening down there, but what he himself felt at night when the hum became indistinguishable from his own heartbeat. In the first days of the mine's complete isolation, mysterious events began to occur. Even the tools sealed in factory grease rusted in the warehouse. The canteen served compote that suddenly tasted of iron. Some of the old-timers' hair turned gray, and several prisoners fell into a deep apathy. They could not be woken up. They only banged their fingers on the bunks in a simple but frighteningly precise rhythm. The doctors compiled a string of certificates: metal fever, acute psychosis, increased gastritis. No one believed these papers. Disappearances began among the prisoners. These were not escapes or suicides. 2 were simply missing during a shift change, then 3 more. They were nowhere to be found, not on the roundabout, not in the tunnel, not in the warehouse. The cameras showed only shadows flashing in the farthest corridor. After each such incident, The workers had the same dreams, as if they were in a room without windows, and behind the wall, a steady, powerful blow of something huge and ancient, inexpressibly lonely. One day, Volkov, usually a perfectly composed major, who, according to regulations, is ready to see the enemy at any post, loses his temper right at a meeting. He grabs the engineer by the shoulder and whispers in his ear, "Do you hear that? They're alive. At night, I feel like someone is breaking in from the other side. They know my name." That same evening, as the worker was walking the perimeter, he heard something whispering behind the sealed steel shaft plate. Not words, just low sounds, vibrations that went into the bones. Voronov wrote it down in his secret journal. Today, the whisper came before the rhythm. They're no longer asleep. By order of Moscow, they began concrete preservation of the tunnels. The idea was conceived by geologists who left the city in a hurry and later answered for their signatures on Lubyanka. But the cement and concrete did not hold up as they should. Every morning, dark bubbles of rye grew in the new bays. The metal swelled, as if someone was heating it from the inside. The technical department admitted, the rock behaves as if it were alive. Voronov once discovered traces of rust on his sleeve, although his suit was clean in the morning. The valet said in a low voice, "Everyone is like that, Pavel Ilyich. This is not our metal." Panic grew as did apathy. People, even high-ranking officers from Moscow, returned from nightly rounds with the look of the seriously ill, eyes that saw something that had not changed for many years. But only Pavel felt worse. He was overcome by melancholy, mixed with a feeling of betrayal, as if he were an uninvited guest at someone's deeply intimate burial. The results were checked in the laboratory. After several hours at the source of the anomaly, the metal samples began to change their structure. The crystal lattice, according to scientists, shrunk and stretched into a new configuration, denser, more directed. A day later, the sample lost its former hardness and became flexible when bent, like a slow plastic substance. Anyone who tried to bend the piece felt as if they were holding not a simple piece of iron, but something capable of responding to your pressure with pressure. The metal began to breathe, the laboratory physicist wrote at the time. From the city side, this area now seemed to exist and not exist. On maps and plans, it was painted black, officially declared a dangerous zone. No one at the construction site spoke openly about it. Even the old people looked away when in the evening someone accidentally threw a piece of slag into the fire and saw blue smoke and a brief steel glint in the flames. At night, Voronov went on his last round. According to the instructions, it was necessary to monitor the work of the drilling rigs to fill out official paperwork. But he knew something stronger than his official duty was pulling him. In the corridor by the door, he met Volkov. The major was muttering something under his breath, not recognizing Pavel, and waved his hand. "You are no longer my enemy. There are no enemies here. There is only us and it." Descending inside, the engineer felt that the tunnel space had changed. It had become longer and lower. Even the air was pressing as if the whole earth was lying on top. Having gone a few steps deeper, Voronov stopped. A weak bluish ripple was coming towards him from the darkness. Each wave of it responded in the heart with a strange relief, as if returning home after a long exile. Pavel stood and listened. The rhythm became clearer. Something like a low singing appeared above the vibration. Not words, but an emotional wave which contained everything: loneliness, melancholy, hunger, centuries of oblivion, and the quiet joy of awakening. He instinctively touched the cold wall. At that moment it seemed to him, or was it true, that behind the wall something reared up like a gigantic animal, and the entire rock moved toward his palm for a split second. At that same moment, a metallic taste rose in his throat, and an alien memory flashed in his consciousness for a moment. A slanting rain of liquid iron, eternal twilight, and a pulse beating somewhere in the very center of the world. Voronov retreated, squatted down, and could not rise for a long time. He was not afraid. He felt that he had witnessed the birth or awakening of a creature related not to man, but to the earth itself, its memory of heavy, stubborn, but living metals. He understood. If he let this rhythm wake up, the city will disappear, and if he tried to destroy it, everyone at the top would die. There is only one way left, to try to lull, chain, lock this invisible power under concrete, knowing that this was only a temporary solution, and to hope that the heart under Magnitka would not want to beat at full strength for a long time. When the order came the next morning to begin the final mothballing of the mines, he accepted it as both a deliverance and a sentence at once. None of those who lived to see the end of the work ever spoke of the ninth section again. But at night, when the city froze and the last whistle died down, many, putting their hand to their hearts, heard somewhere beneath them a barely perceptible but confident blow. Knock, knock, knock. On the first day of concreting, it seemed that everything had finally turned for the better. The quarry creaked, the mixers hummed, tanks of liquid lead were driven up to the shaft, and the city heard the familiar roar of the steel-making machine, as if hiding its fears behind titanium shields. But no one except engineer Pavel Voronov noticed. New motives were running through this industrial symphony, with each blow of the old worker's ladle. With each liter of molten metal, the air became thick as when a thunderstorm was approaching, and stuffy as in a bathhouse on the eve of trouble. At the surface posts, the duty officers began to complain more often of insomnia. The usual backache or toothache was replaced by something new. At night, they heard a hum going down through the concrete. Not a dull one, but a ringing one, as if someone huge was pounding the walls with giant hammers. Several people said they could hear it even through their pillows. Once a thick, warm fog rose over the city, thick and warm, like the breath of an animal, and even the construction manager heard a strange rhythm in his chest in his sleep. A strange expression appeared among the workers: metal fever. The symptoms were similar for everyone: high temperature, dry mouth, a strong smell of iron on the breath, dreams of endless corridors with liquid, shiny veins flowing through them. Doctors were called from Moscow. Occupational pathologists were shaking their heads, and one old lab assistant whispered confidentially, "This is the sorrow of the earth, Voronov. It gets sick when it's pressed too long." During this same period, the concrete did not set properly. In the anomalous zone it settled in spots, and after 2 days, bubbles of rusty water appeared in it. Experts threw up their hands, blaming the quality of the cement, but even the solution freshly brought from the region behaved as if there was not soil underneath it, but living, stubborn flesh. The whole city seemed to be falling apart into two worlds. Above, traditions, communal meetings, successful reports, songs accompanied by an accordion. Below, a viscous reality, where every word echoed as a knock somewhere far away, underground. Every day, more and more workers disappeared for short or long periods. Some were discharged with nervous fits. Others began to speak in whispers, and a senior prisoner Dyke began to leave for hours in a locked basement, sitting there in the dark, rhythmically tapping his palm on an iron bench. Voronov observed all this with a keen sense of anxiety and, at times, envy. More and more often he himself was drawn to the closed hatch, where the wall was warm, and under the palm of his hand he felt not only a vibrational response, but also a thought response. He made notes. Today there was a feeling that if I ask a question, I will get an answer. Not in form, but in tone. A moment of peace immediately appears, and then a sharp desire to lower my head, listen, and dissolve. The teams filling the mine began working in strange synchronicity. The men stopped arguing, spoke only on the matter. All actions were coordinated, as if someone invisible was conducting. And those who left the site did not remember the details of the shift, only an iron taste on the tongue and a strange feeling that they were working not quite for people. The daydreams began. Pavel began to see shadows flickering even in the light, and sometimes it seemed to him that the dark veins of the workers passing through the overalls were showing through, and their faces were becoming like reflections in rusty water. Worker Prokopiev once whispered to him in the corridor, "Don't touch the concrete. It's like skin. It'll find a crack. Everything will breathe again." The lanterns grew increasingly dim near the entrance to the tunnels. The metal of the instruments became warped after being changed, and spots of sticky blackish soot emerged from the holes, seeming damp in the evenings. The iron samples began to swing on the rods like pendulums. No one could explain why. Major Volkov was losing control of himself. His shouts sounded muffled even in the fresh air, and once he slapped a young engineer for laughing after a conversation about work. "You can't laugh here. Got it, Greenhorn?" Volkov shouted. "They don't like laughter." Meanwhile, rumors began to spread in the city that someone had heard blood coming out of the asphalt at night, rusty and hot, and then disappearing. One day, one of the truck drivers told how he had seen a strange figure at dawn near the entrance to the mine, resembling a man, but it stood with its face down, bent over, and it seemed as if it was listening not to the sound of the street, but to something else very far away. In the middle of this week, the chief geologist of the construction site, Yudin, attempts suicide. In a letter he writes that everything has already woken up. Who will be to blame when it wants to come out, when all our furnaces, blast furnace shops and ambitions become only unnecessary pain for it? On the hardest night, when the storm twisted a thick ridge over Magnitka, and the electricity was walking around the entire perimeter, Pavel went to check the cement hatch. He heard not a rhythm, but a clear, conscious phrase, as if spoken somewhere inside the ear in a language he did not know, but understood. "You are not our enemy. Do not destroy the connection. We are sleeping, but it hurts us here." And then he understood. Metal fever is not a disease. It is the Earth's way of protecting itself, of warning the alien. The living, steel organism does not want evil or revenge. It only waits to be left alone again, forever under a heavy layer of concrete and oblivion. The next morning after the storm, the workers discovered for the first time the concrete had set firmly and evenly. The metal had quietly gone inside, and all traces of living veins had disappeared from the walls. The tower crane had stopped forever. There was a feeling that not only the construction site, but the city's memory itself had crossed a certain line. But deep in the heart of every witness of those events there lived a certainty. If you stand still at night, lean against the floor of the stairwell, you will hear that hum again, slow, low, eternal. The city survived. Metal was tamed. But the heart of the earth found new ways to beat. In dreams, in fears, in pain, in the thirst to hear at least once that absolute silence that can only be inside someone who was before people and will remain after them. And forever, from that day on, in every hammer crash, someone heard that same unsolved song. Winter came quickly to Magnitogorsk. Pipes groaned dully in the hazy air, and dark brown frost crawled across the city windows, as if the earth itself had given a sign that time had contracted and entered a new phase. On the surface, everything was quiet, but below, in the concrete sarcophagi, the permanent, unbearably intermittent rhythm continued. The metal heart, under the rubble and suffocating lead, did not disappear. It only became an alien nerve center for everyone who had ever stood at the entrance to the ninth tunnel. Concrete, lead, layers of the latest Soviet technology, all this is just oblivion for the sake of reporting. In fact, the city lived its second life. In the first week after the closure at the construction site, strange phenomena began to be noticed. Tractors stalled for no reason. Reinforcement became covered with ripples, and sounds merged in the warehouses. Instrumental, streaming, but suddenly in this noise, a clear bass appeared, breathing a living rhythm. Voronov could not shake the feeling that under every step he felt not just a vibration, but a response. Now every touch of the railing, every blow of the hammer, every steel beam, everything responded somewhere there under the many-meter thickness. People complained about dreams. Workers imagined iron rivers, along which they themselves floated like drops of hot cast iron, and engineers dreamed that their breath dissolved in a stream of liquid aluminum, and every word became part of an unknown, almost musical formula. Major Volkov was experiencing his own hell. The service instructions had long since lost their meaning for him. He would wake up at night, sit on the edge of his bed, and in complete silence feel that his own heart had been mixed with someone else's rhythm. He heard inside himself, not always, but more and more often, fragments of someone else's pain, loneliness, and painful hunger, familiar from childhood and from the very nature of metal. On such nights, he would lock himself in his office and write pages of incoherent notes in which he would curse the city and beg the invisible it to leave them alone. In a short report from Moscow, Voronov reported as follows: concreting is complete, ores are stabilized, no anomalies were recorded. The personnel is being gradually withdrawn. There is no acute neuropsychic impact. The production cycle has been restored. But in personal notes, everything was different. Yesterday, I felt everything around me has ceased to be alien. The city itself has absorbed the beat. Now it migrates through the workshops like an echo. Sometimes I want to go underground, listen to the metal singing inside the walls, but I understand this is not my desire. Patients with unusual complaints appeared in the city hospital. A feeling of heaviness in the wrists, stiffness in the joints, a vivid dream about molten metal. A young doctor, just back from student practice, tried to laugh, but a week later unexpectedly quit his job and left the city. In a medical history journal, there's one note: I don't feel like myself anymore. I am an electrical wire. One night, when the storm hit the open field again, from the very depths of the concrete, where the central breach hall had been, the workers heard a new sound. Not just a trembling low bass, but a phrase. It lasted a second, was distinct only in the first 2 or 3 words, and then spread out into a metallic plea. We are not enemies. Do not call us to the light. We are asleep. Pavel understood. The contact had reached a new level. A real dialogue had taken place, albeit in the language of sensations and emotions. The heart under Magnitka was aware of its position. Concrete and lead were not a prison for it. It was a temporary blanket, an attempt at isolation, but not destruction. An unspoken cult of death metal began among engineers. No one admitted it even to themselves, but people instinctively stopped trusting fresh materials. They preferred to use old reinforcement. They treated every nut carefully, as if it were a fetish. It seemed that the earth required careful handling, that any fracture could cause an outbreak of fever. The more the city hurried to live its 5-year plan, the more reserved and strict the mystery of the heart underground grew. Volkov once tried to record sounds from the central concrete well on tape. In the recording, instead of a rumble or office business marks, there was a steady alarm that sounded exactly once a minute. An acoustic specialist declared it techno noise, A local electrician said with fear that if you listen to the recording for a long time, you begin to see how the voltage lines at the substation move and multiply on their own, forming a diagram that no one drew. In the last days of winter, a turning point came. Some of the old specialists were suddenly taken to Moscow. At night in the barracks, they said that he had become dangerous. He heard too well. Others began to disappear without reason. The rest withdrew, lost interest in conversations, and even in drinking, looked through their colleagues into the void. Some people said that when you walk alone through a night workshop, you suddenly hear clearly not an external voice, but an internal one. Don't be afraid of me. I breathe to survive. I remember the beginning. These voices mixed with the rhythm of the city, grew into everyday life, became as inevitable as smoke or the roar of furnaces. For Voronov, the most terrifying moment was when the heart of the city and what was inside suddenly became surprisingly familiar. Not a monster from antiquity, not a machine, not an alien creature, but something with which you were connected by a feeling of shared loneliness, expectation, heavy sleep. Industrial Magnitogorsk lived, grew, modernized, and only a select few knew. Deep under layers of lead and concrete, in impenetrable darkness, there is always another rhythm. Nearby, under the skin of every house and workshop, not ceasing even in the most resounding joy or despair, knocks, sometimes in time with human hearts, an alien call. A call that, if felt even once, changes you forever. And that evening, instead of going home, Pavel went down to the old buried gallery, sat down, leaned his back against the cold concrete, closed his eyes, and for a long, long time simply listened to the earth speak the language of metal. He knew that their attempt to isolate the miracle was not a victory, but a delay. The secret had now become part of the city and everyone who had ever heard the Titan's voice. It cannot be forgotten, erased, or archived. It would live as long as Magnitogorsk lived, or maybe even longer. The first spring rains washed the dust off the roofs. The city began to live anew. Official reports reported on the early completion of construction stages, and congratulatory telegrams hurried from Moscow. But at site number 9, instead of jubilation, there was an oppressive bustle. The order for the complete isolation of the anomalous zone came without signatures, only a stamp, special importance. Conservation immediately. It was not explained who or what was being sealed, the mine, the tunnels, the memory of the workers themselves, or perhaps something more ancient than any human project. In this whirlpool of events, engineer Pavel Voronov realized that the final act of the strange superiority of iron and rhythm over the will of living people had arrived. In a laboratory where they had previously argued about alloy grades and concrete consumption, they now spoke in half-whispers about nervous problems or silently filled out papers about the issuance of protective equipment for non-local work. Major Volkov walked around furiously, did not sleep, and at night he stared for a long time at the empty maps of the region, as if he were looking for a loophole to his former life. The conservation work began at dawn. Thick cables were laid out along the perimeter of the site, and tanks with liquid lead and concrete were brought up. The first filled tunnels encountered strange resistance. After a day, cracks appeared, the blocks swelled, as if the air from inside was pressing with unnatural force. The tools wore out overnight. The metal was covered not with ordinary corrosion, but with something resembling a thin organic network, slowly spreading along the joints. In his personal diary, Voronov noted, "The concrete doesn't set properly, it rushes about, bubbles. It seems that something inside the tunnels is contracting and resisting, like a mortally tired animal. People fall asleep sitting up, shuddering, repeating the same words. Don't touch, don't call to the light, Don't disturb my sleep. There were dangerous days, too. One of the prisoners, who had stood by the flooded shaft all shift, suddenly threw himself at the hatch and began furiously pounding the concrete with a crowbar, shouting that the iron heart is crying and must be freed. They barely calmed him down, but after this incident, people in the city began to try not to say the words nine, heart, and beating out loud. Volkov, obsessed with instructions, tried to dial the emergency line to Moscow. He explained that the situation was getting out of control, that people could not be held by orders. But the answer was the same. A breakthrough is unacceptable. Any information is treason. It ended with the major immersing himself in work with a frenzy in which Pavel began to discern not courage, but despair. In the middle of the conservation work, it was decided to fill everything that had ever come into contact with the anomaly with concrete. Ventilation shafts, old rails, even the personal belongings of those who had disappeared. At the same time, the workers involuntarily walked as far away from the main hall as possible. Walking along the perimeter, Pavel felt the trembling under his feet almost disappear. But his heart suddenly sank in his chest. He realized that with the final sealing, not only the anomaly was disappearing, but also the last strong connection between him and the mystery that had made him a different person. The night before the final concreting, a thunderstorm began, and as soon as the first booming thunder swept over Magnitogorsk, such a low vibrational response began to sway deep under the pouring that it was heard in the workshops and seemed to rush inside the concrete itself. People rushed behind their ears. It was not a sound, but a vibration that penetrated into the bones and back. In his personal notebook, Pavel wrote with an uneven hand. Today, for the first time, the concrete lay quietly. It doesn't bubble, it doesn't pull at your hand. Maybe it decided to retreat, go deeper, or simply resigned itself to being put to sleep once again for a century. I am grateful. I feel quieter. The following days merged into a brown routine. New slabs, welders, blast engineers. The blast furnace never appeared over this place. Instead, years later, a small park was built where not a single sandy wind ever lingered. Volkov was soon transferred to another city. People heard only rumors about him, that he had left, that he had gone crazy, that he now lived in a quiet, abandoned house near Omsk, where he was afraid of knocks at night and always kept the radio on. Pavel stayed. He worked at the plant for many years, replaced thousands of people, but never dared to tell his wife and children why he always knew from the ear-piercing tapping of the railway platforms whether that very underground heart was alive or not. Magnitka grew and passed into new eras, and in place of the closed area, over the years, trees grew and a shady bench was put in. And if in the evening you put your ear to the cold slabs of the sidewalk and hold your breath, you could catch the elusive knock, knock, knock. Not the hum of the city, not the steps of passers-by, but the echo of a deep, concrete-bound life that waits for its hour, patiently and immortally. Spring was coming inexorably to Magnitogorsk, driving away the lingering winter fogs, but the air was still filled with the feeling of an impending change, locked away in the depths of the underground. The city, pierced by the sounds of metallurgical shops, lived its usual life. But for Pavel, Voronov, and those who at least once heard the pulsation of the heart, under Magnitka, everything was different. Many winters had passed since the concrete slabs had been laid on the closed galleries. It seemed that the anomaly had fallen asleep forever, buried under layers of lead and cement. But in fact, life beneath it was only changing its rhythm. Now the pulse was quieter, but still audible to those who knew how to listen. Pavel, already an old man, often stood on the observation platform of the workshop, examining the smoking chimneys as a petrified monument to an era in which metal not only created, but also lived with its own strange, alien breath. When the rumble of the machines died down and the plant began to sink into the evening silence, he put his hand on the metal handrail and listened. Knock, knock, knock. A slow, rhythmic beat in time with forgotten depths. There were rumors in Voronov's house that he had become taciturn and thoughtful, that he often stared into space, and that his eyes reflected something that remained unknown to those around him. The light in his room often came on and went out at night, as if answering the call of a long-gone secret. One cold evening, Volkov came to him, now an elderly but still proud and passionate major, a man who could not forget those days in the mines. Their meeting was long, full of silent confessions and short memories of what could not be told. Pavel, Volkov said, "Do you hear it too? It's not just a hum, it's a call, as if the earth is reminding us of itself." "Yes," Voronov answered. "He always reminds. And while we live, he waits, with his rhythm, slow and inexorable, like the breath of centuries." The city was changing little by little. The youth, under the layer of everyday worries, did not notice these strange rhythms and shadows. But the old people knew that Magnitka was no longer just a metallurgical giant. It was a living organism, locked in an eternal dance with the ancient rhythm of the earth. One day, Pavel saw an old map of the mines in a local museum exhibit. His gaze stopped on a place marked Section 9. Memories came flooding back. He closed his eyes and heard it, that same deep thud that never stopped even in silence. Many years have passed. Magnitogorsk has experienced a change of eras, from industrial feats to modernization and automation. Many legends about the metal heart have turned into poetic stories of pensioners whispering them by the fireplace. And Pavel Voronov went down in the history of the plant as a man who understood that not everything that can be built from metal is subject to human will. His last day on the job was a quiet one. When the factory workers' voices had died down and the essential equipment had been repaired, he walked out into the shop and placed his palm against a huge row of steel beams. There, deep in the metal, he felt a familiar vibration, a ringing, living rhythm that was more familiar to him than anything he knew. Leaving the plant, Voronov took a deep breath. The endless magnetic mountains stretched out before him, under which the heart slept. He knew that one day it would wake up when the time came, but not to destroy it, but to remind him of what lives and breathes in the very heart of the earth, and that no man, no era can drown it out forever. The last melody that Paul heard in his soul was a story told by silence. We are the continuation of what was, and the beginning of what will be. We are the blood under the city, the eternal rhythm that cannot be stopped. In Magnitka, like an ancient titanium giant, in the blink of an eye felt that a memory lived within it that neither concrete walls nor the clocks of time could erase. Knock, knock, knock. The pulse of living steel. In the eternal land,